Okay. Again, thank you for all your patience. Thank you for coming out to Book Passage and supporting your independent bookstore. We really appreciate you coming out to these events and supporting these great authors. My name is Melissa Sestaro, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing author and journalist Stephen Pressman. Stephen is the author of Outrageous Betrayal, a book about the founder of Est, Werner Erhard. He has studied in the field of journalism for more than 30 years, and he is the writer and director of the HBO film 50 Children, The Rescue Mission of Mr. and Mrs. Kraus. His brand new book, 50 Children, expands on the film and details how, against all odds, Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus traveled into the hostile landscape of Nazi-occupied Vienna in 1939 and returned to America with 50 children. This story is remarkable in its vivid detail and speaks of hope and loss during one of the most devastating and shameful periods of our history. Stephen is here this evening to share his journey with this book and to talk to us about some of the research he did that makes this story so very personal and so very powerful. Please join me in welcoming author Stephen Pressman to Book Passage.
Thank you, Melissa. Appreciate that. It's wonderful to be here and to see some familiar friends and some unfamiliar faces. I appreciate everybody being here. It's one of those rare days where it's almost as warm in San Francisco as it is in Marin. So it's always a treat to be in warm weather on either side of the Golden Gate Bridge. I appreciate that. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to spend just a few minutes sort of revisiting the first few pages of the book because it really sets the scene for what I hope you all will come to see as a quite incredible but true story, even in places where it really sounds and, in fact, reads perhaps like a piece of fiction. I promise you, this is a nonfiction book. It all really happened. And I've got slides. And hopefully this will work. So let's start. Yes, there we go. Well, Eleanor Kraus glanced around the dining room of her spacious and comfortable 3-story brick home on Cypress Street, not far from Philadelphia's quite fashionable Rittenhouse Square. The dinner hour was approaching, and Eleanor wanted to be sure that the table had been properly set. Her husband, Gil, had not yet arrived home from his downtown law office, but Eleanor had already dressed for the evening, choosing a stylish silk dress and a pair of her favorite T-strap pumps. A strand of pearls set off against a new pair of matching earrings and a deep red coat of lacquered nail polish completed her classically elegant look. One of Gil's nieces was bringing her fiancé to dinner that evening, and Eleanor, as always, wanted everything to shine. Moments after Gil walked through the front door a few minutes after 6 o'clock, Eleanor greeted him with a quick kiss on the cheek, but tartly reminded him that their dinner guests were due to arrive very soon. Gil smiled knowingly at his wife, the way husbands often smile knowingly at their wives. He removed his overcoat and set down the worn leather briefcase that was filled with papers from his office. And just as Eleanor was about to dash back into the kitchen to check on the dinner, Gil said, "There's something I need to discuss with you, so come into the bathroom while I shave." Eleanor had no way of knowing at that moment that her life was about to be turned upside down, and in ways that she could not possibly have ever imagined. But she followed her husband upstairs and into the bathroom that adjoined the couple's bedroom. Gil undid his necktie. He pulled off the starched white shirt that he had worn to work that day, leaving on a sleeveless undershirt as he prepared to shave. Gil was 42 years old, and he and Eleanor, who was 35 at the time, had been married for more than 14 years. And by now, this was in early January of 1939, the couple had 2 children, 13-year-old Stephen and 9-year-old Ellen. As Gil stood there in the bathroom, filling the sink with steaming hot water and carefully scraping the razor across his face, Eleanor thought to herself just how fit and handsome he was. With his broad shoulders and muscular torso, Gil had the same athletic physique that he had boasted more than 20 years earlier, when he had competed on both the varsity wrestling and the football team during his undergraduate days at the University of Pennsylvania. Imagine a Jew playing football in the Ivy League, no less. Well, while Eleanor sat on the edge of the bathtub, Gil mentioned that his very good friend, Louis Levine, had come by the office to see him that day. Louis was a successful real estate man in New York, but his visit to Gil's law office had nothing to do with normal business matters. Instead, he had dropped in to see Gil in Levine's capacity as the Grand Master, the leader of a group called Brit Shalom, a Jewish fraternal organization to which Gil also belonged. The 2 men had talked all that afternoon about a seemingly impossible idea, whether there might be any chance of Brit Shalom helping to rescue Jewish children trapped inside Nazi Germany. Both Gil and Louis were only too aware of the worsening conditions for Jews who were living inside Hitler's Reich. And the 2 men discussed the possibility that Brit Shalom might somehow be able to sponsor some kind of a rescue effort. Levine reminded Gil that the group had recently built a children's summer camp along the banks of Perkiomen Creek in Collegeville, a semi-rural area about an hour outside of Philadelphia. And on the other side of the camp, Brit Shalom had constructed a large 1-story stone house that included 25 bedrooms. The house, probably intended for use as an old age home, at the moment was standing completely empty. Gil had enormous respect for Louis Levine, and he listened carefully as the Brit Shalom leader talked passionately about the ever-increasing dangers that were confronting Jews living in Nazi Germany. The newspapers, all throughout the United States, had for some time now been filled with articles about the growing atrocities that the Nazis had been directing against Jews. In fact, less than 2 months earlier, the terrifying pogrom that quickly became known as Kristallnacht in November of 1938, the Night of Broken Glass, had erupted throughout Germany and Austria. Now, as that afternoon in January 1939 wore on, Levine finally got to the real point of his visit. He knew all about Gil's reputation as a tough-minded lawyer who seemed to be able to solve just about any challenge put before him. And Levine bluntly asked if Gil himself would be willing to take on the Children's Rescue Project. Now, other groups at this point, including several Jewish organizations, had been trying since 1934, within a year of Hitler becoming Chancellor of Germany, to rescue Jewish children and bring them to safety in the United States. Such efforts, however, had yielded very little success, at most bringing over only a small handful of children, before bumping up, as always, against America's strict immigration laws. No one could figure out a way to bring in larger numbers of children. And by the time that Louis Levine left Gil's law office that day, Gil knew that he could not possibly turn down the challenge that others had been unable to meet. Well, Eleanor, meanwhile, is listening patiently, as wives often listen patiently to their husbands, as Gil recounted his lengthy conversation earlier that afternoon, and finally it was her turn to talk. Gil,